Jason had been looking forward to this vacation for months. After saving up and planning, he was finally in a country known for its historic palaces, royal traditions, and the famous royal guards. The guards were a popular attraction for tourists like Jason because of how they stood so still, no matter what anyone did. To him, they seemed more like statues than people. The bright sun shone down on the palace courtyard, where tourists gathered to take pictures and videos of the guards. Jason joined the crowd, his phone in hand. He admired the guards' sharp uniform and the polished weapon he held. The discipline was impressive. Jason had to admit that much. But as he looked around, he noticed something else. Some tourists were trying to make the guards react. One person waved wildly in front of a guard's face. Another pretended to trip, hoping to get a chuckle or a smirk. Yet the guards didn't even blink. Jason watched, fascinated. He thought to himself, I wonder if I could make one of them break character. Jason's curiosity turned into a mischievous idea. With a grin, he moved closer to one of the guards, standing just a few feet away. Wow, you're good at this, Jason said aloud, even though he knew the guard wouldn't respond. He waved his hand, trying to get the man's attention. Nothing. The guard didn't even flinch. The crowd around Jason chuckled, and that gave him more confidence. Feeling bold, Jason pulled out a crumpled food wrapper from his pocket. It was from the snack he had eaten earlier. Let's see if you're still unshakable after this, he joked to himself. Jason tossed the wrapper, and it landed on the guard's pristine black boot. The crowd went silent. For a moment, the air was filled with tension. Jason glanced around, realizing everyone was now staring at him. The guard didn't move. His face remained as calm and emotionless as ever. But something about his silence made Jason feel a bit uneasy. He laughed nervously and shrugged. Come on, it's just a joke, he said, trying to brush it off. A few people in the crowd whispered to each other. One man muttered, That's not funny. He shouldn't have done that. Jason ignored them. In his mind, it wasn't a big deal. It was just a harmless prank, right? But as Jason walked away, leaving the wrapper behind, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had crossed a line. Something told him this wasn't over. Jason continued his walk through the busy streets, feeling proud of his little prank. He had been so sure that the guard wouldn't react. After all, the guards were famous for their ability to stay still, no matter what. It had been a harmless joke, right? Nothing to worry about. But as Jason strolled along, something felt off. He noticed a few people staring at him as he passed by. At first, he brushed it off. Tourists were always staring at each other in strange places, right? Still, the feeling lingered. It was as if something had changed, but he couldn't put his finger on it. A woman in a nearby cafe gave him an odd look as he walked by. Jason gave her a quick smile, but she didn't smile back. Instead, she looked away, whispering something to her friend. Jason felt a little uncomfortable. Was she talking about him? As he turned a corner, he heard a few more whispers. He looked around, trying to figure out what was going on, but no one seemed to be paying much attention to him. Maybe I'm just imagining it, Jason thought. No harm done. But as he made his way to a nearby park, his phone buzzed. It was a notification from one of his social media apps. He tapped the screen and saw something that made his stomach drop. The video was titled, Tourist Disrespects Royal Guard. Jason's eyes widened as he realized the video was showing exactly what he had done, tossing the trash onto the guard's boot. He clicked on the video, and as it loaded, his heart began to race. It was from one of the tourists in the crowd who had recorded the whole thing. The footage clearly showed Jason throwing the trash at the guard, and the silence that followed. The video was already gaining views, with many people commenting on how disrespectful Jason had been. Jason stared at the screen, his face turning red. Oh no, he thought. This is bad. The comments were flooding in. That's terrible. He deserves to be kicked out of the country. Jason tried to shake off the embarrassment, but it wasn't easy. More notifications popped up. People were tagging him in the comments, calling him out for his actions. Great, Jason muttered to himself. He had wanted to make a small joke, but now it was turning into a disaster. He looked around the park again, feeling like everyone was staring at him, judging him for what he had done. Just then, he heard a loud voice in the distance. "Hey, aren't you the guy who threw trash at the Royal Guard?" Jason turned to see a group of people walking toward him. They were all pointing at him and talking among themselves. Jason's heart skipped a beat. He tried to act casual, but deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The video had already gone viral, and now Jason realized that his prank wasn't as harmless as he had thought. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about how people viewed him, and the shame was beginning to settle in. Jason couldn't stop thinking about the video. Everywhere he went, he felt like people were watching him, whispering about him. He tried to forget it and enjoy his day, but the more he thought about it, the worse it seemed. The video had gone viral faster than he expected, and he knew the consequences of his prank were just beginning. Later that evening, Jason sat in a cafe, scrolling through his phone. The video was everywhere, on news sites, social media, and even some blogs. It wasn't just the video that bothered him. It was the comments. People weren't laughing about it anymore. They were angry. Some comments said things like, "This is so disrespectful," and he should be banned from visiting the palace. Jason's face turned bright red as he read through the posts. He had only meant to make a small joke, but now it seemed like everyone was judging him. He put his phone down on the table, rubbing his temples. "What have I done?" He muttered to himself. "It's just a stupid video," he tried to tell himself, but he knew it wasn't that simple. It wasn't just about a silly prank anymore. It was about respect for other cultures and traditions. Jason knew that the royal guards were an important symbol in this country. They represented the nation's history and discipline. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that what he did wasn't funny. It was hurtful. He decided to go back to the palace the next day to try and make things right. As he walked toward the gates, he saw a small crowd gathered around, some of them pointing and talking. Jason's heart sank. He could tell they were still talking about him. He tried to ignore them, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. When Jason reached the area where the royal guards stood, he hesitated. They were standing as still as ever, their faces expressionless, their uniforms perfect. Jason looked at the guard he had disrespected. The man didn't even glance at him, still standing at attention as though nothing had happened. But Jason couldn't help but feel the weight of his actions. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me," Jason said, his voice shaking slightly. The guard didn't move or acknowledge him, but Jason didn't expect him to. Instead, Jason turned to one of the nearby officers who was watching the scene. "I'm really sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to disrespect anyone. It was a dumb joke, and I've learned my lesson." The officer looked at him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Apology accepted," the officer said. "But remember, what you did goes against the respect we have for our traditions here. It's not just about you. It's about the history and pride of this country." Jason nodded, feeling a deep sense of shame. "I understand," he said quietly. He realized then that his actions had affected more than just the guard. They had hurt the entire country's pride. As Jason walked away, he promised himself that he would never make the same mistake again. He had learned the hard way that some things, like respect for others, were far more important than any prank or joke. The next morning, Jason's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a notification from social media. It was an email. He opened it, and his stomach dropped as he read the subject line. "Your actions have been reported." The email came from the embassy. Jason's heart raced. The message explained that the country's authorities were aware of the video. It wasn't just the public's reaction that concerned them. They took matters like this seriously. They had reviewed the footage and confirmed that Jason's behavior had been disrespectful toward the royal guard, which was considered a serious offense. The email ended with a request for Jason to attend a meeting at the embassy the following day. Jason felt a wave of panic wash over him. He had never thought his small joke would turn into something this big. He wondered what the authorities would do. Would they fine him? Would they ban him from ever returning to the country? His mind raced with worst-case scenarios. He spent the rest of the day pacing around his hotel room, unsure of what to expect. He knew he had made a mistake, and he had already apologized to the officer at the palace, but it seemed like things were spiraling out of control. The video had gone viral, and people were still talking about it. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that his actions had already done enough damage. The next day, Jason made his way to the embassy. His heart pounded in his chest as he walked through the front doors. The security guards gave him a stern look as he entered, and he was escorted to a waiting area. A few minutes later, a man in a sharp suit appeared. He introduced himself as an official from the embassy and invited Jason to sit down. "Mr. Jason," the official began, "I'm sure you know why you're here. The video of your behavior toward the royal guard has caused quite a stir, not just here, but back home as well." Jason nodded, trying to keep his composure. "I know," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I'm really sorry. It was a stupid joke, and I never meant to disrespect anyone." The official raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything right away. Instead, he slid a folder across the table toward Jason. "This is the report we've received from the palace guards. They've asked us to follow up on this situation, and I must tell you, it's not just about your actions. It's about how your behavior reflects on both you and your country. In some cultures, a gesture like this can be seen as an insult." Jason felt a wave of guilt. He hadn't thought about it like that before. To him, it was just a harmless prank, but now he understood how deeply it could have hurt the people who took pride in their traditions. "I understand," Jason said, his voice more sincere now. "I really do. I've learned a lot from this, and I don't want to make excuses. I just want to make it right." The official nodded. "Good. We'll consider this matter closed for now, but be mindful of your behavior in the future. In the meantime, we ask that you apologize publicly to the royal guard and perform community service." Jason agreed, feeling a deep sense of relief. The punishment was fair, and he understood why it was necessary. He promised to make things right and not take the traditions of another country so lightly again. As Jason left the embassy, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He knew he still had a long way to go to fully make amends, but at least he was heading in the right direction. The next few days were a blur for Jason. He spent his time reflecting on the mistake he had made, trying to figure out how to fix things. He knew that the best way to make up for his actions was to be sincere in his apology and take responsibility for what he had done. The authorities had been clear about the need for an apology, and he couldn't avoid it any longer. Jason decided to return to the palace, the place where it all began. This time, however, he wasn't feeling the same confidence he had felt when he had made his joke. He was nervous, knowing that this was his chance to show that he understood the gravity of what he had done. As he approached the gates of the palace, he noticed a group of tourists standing in front of the guards, taking photos. They were smiling and laughing, but no one dared to disturb the guards the way Jason had. He watched them for a moment, feeling a sense of respect that he hadn't fully understood before. He stepped forward and approached one of the guards. The man was standing perfectly still, his eyes looking straight ahead, as if nothing could distract him. Jason took a deep breath. He didn't expect the guard to speak to him, but he knew that the apology needed to come from his heart. "Excuse me," Jason said quietly, his voice shaking slightly. The guard didn't acknowledge him, as expected, but Jason wasn't deterred. He continued, "I want to apologize for what I did. I know it was wrong, and I'm truly sorry for disrespecting you and your country. I wasn't thinking when I threw that trash at you. It was thoughtless, and I understand now how important your role is here." Jason took a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I understand now that being a royal guard isn't just about standing still. It's about pride, tradition, and respect. And I didn't show any of that when I threw the trash. I was wrong. The guard remained silent, but Jason felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. He knew that the apology wouldn't erase what he had done, but it was a step toward making things right. As Jason finished his apology, he noticed a few tourists nearby watching him. Some of them smiled, while others simply nodded, clearly approving of his sincerity. It was strange, but Jason felt as if he was finally beginning to understand what it meant to show respect, to truly honor another culture. Jason then turned and walked toward the palace officer he had spoken to earlier. The officer was standing nearby, watching the exchange. He gave Jason a nod of approval as Jason approached. "You've done well," the officer said, his tone calm. "It's not easy to admit when you've made a mistake, especially in front of others. But you've shown that you understand the importance of respect, and that's what matters." Jason smiled, grateful for the officer's words. He didn't know if he would ever be able to undo the damage he had caused, but he was starting to feel like he was on the path to redemption. He had learned a valuable lesson about humility, respect, and understanding other cultures. It wasn't just a vacation anymore. It had become a life-changing experience. As Jason left the palace that day, he felt lighter. He had made a mistake, yes, but he was determined not to make it again. He had learned that a small act of thoughtlessness could have a lasting impact, and now he understood just how much respect mattered. A few days after Jason's sincere apology, he was called to the embassy again. This time, his nerves were worse than before. He wasn't sure what to expect. Had he done enough? Would the authorities be satisfied with his apology, or would they still take further action? The uncertainty made him anxious as he made his way back to the embassy. As soon as he arrived, he was escorted into a small meeting room. The same official from before greeted him with a nod. Jason took a seat, trying to stay calm, but he could feel his heart racing. "Mr. Jason," the official began, "we've reviewed your actions, and we've taken your apology into account. However, as we discussed, there are consequences to your behavior. The royal guards represent not just the palace, but the values of our entire nation. And while your apology was genuine, we must still ensure that this doesn't happen again." Jason nodded, understanding. He had expected this. He had learned that actions had consequences, and now he would have to face them. "We've decided to issue a fine," the official continued. "It's not an excessive amount, but it serves as a reminder that disrespecting our traditions will not be tolerated." Jason let out a quiet sigh of relief. He had been worried that the punishment might be much worse. A fine, while uncomfortable, seemed manageable. He was ready to accept it. "But that's not all," the official added. "In addition to the fine, we would like to ask you to perform some community service during the remainder of your stay here." Jason raised an eyebrow. Community service? He hadn't expected that. The official continued, "You'll be assisting in cleaning public spaces and helping out with local events. It's a way for you to give back to the community and show your commitment to learning about our culture and respecting our ways." Jason's mind raced. Community service wasn't something he had planned for, but he understood why it was necessary. It wasn't just about paying a fine. It was about showing he was willing to make up for his actions. He agreed to the terms without hesitation. "Thank you," the official said, closing the folder in front of him. "We believe this is a fair resolution. However, I do want to remind you that your actions were not only disrespectful to the royal guard, but also to the people of our country. Remember, when you travel, you represent more than just yourself. You represent your nation, and your actions can leave a lasting impression." Jason took a deep breath. "I understand. I've learned a lot from this, and I'm truly sorry for what I did. I promise I'll make it right." The official nodded and handed him a piece of paper with the details of the community service schedule. "I believe you will. Let this be a lesson, Mr. Jason. A small action can have a big impact, and it's never too late to correct a mistake." As Jason left the embassy, he felt a strange sense of gratitude. It was uncomfortable, but the consequences were fair. He realized that this experience had changed him. He would never again take another culture's traditions lightly, and he would carry the lesson of respect with him wherever he went. Over the next few weeks, Jason worked hard on his community service. He cleaned streets, helped set up local events, and met many people who were kind and welcoming. It wasn't easy, but it was exactly what he needed to show his commitment to making things right. And in the end, it felt good to know that he had done something positive to balance out his earlier mistake. As the days passed, Jason threw himself into his community service. It wasn't easy work, cleaning streets, helping organize events, and meeting with locals, but each day he felt himself growing more connected to the country he had once disrespected. The people he worked with were kind and patient, showing him how important their traditions and customs were to them. Jason started to see the beauty in their culture. He visited local markets, tasted traditional foods, and learned about the history that shaped the country. At first, he had just come to see the famous royal guards and enjoy a vacation. But now he realized he had been blind to the deeper meaning of his surroundings. Every detail mattered to the people who lived here. One day, after finishing his morning shift cleaning a public square, Jason sat down on a bench to rest. He looked around and noticed a group of children playing nearby. They were laughing, running, and enjoying their time in the park, unaware of the grown-ups who worked to keep their city clean and beautiful. Jason smiled as he watched them. He thought about how much effort went into keeping the city looking perfect, and how little things like his earlier action had the potential to harm that effort. A woman who had been helping organize an upcoming local event walked over to him. "You're doing great work," she said with a warm smile. "We really appreciate your help." Jason nodded, feeling proud. "I'm happy to do it. I've learned a lot over the past few days. I didn't understand the value of these traditions until now. I was careless before, but I'm trying to make up for it." The woman's expression softened. "That's all we can ask for. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we learn from them." Jason couldn't help but agree. He had made a mistake, but the people around him had given him a chance to make things right. That chance was something he would never take for granted again. Every day, he worked harder to prove that he understood the importance of respecting the culture and people of this place. As his community service neared its end, Jason had a chance to reflect on the entire experience. He had been upset at first, thinking he was just a tourist getting punished for a harmless joke. But now he saw things from a different perspective. The royal guard, the people who lived here, and the culture they upheld were all part of something far bigger than just his visit. They were proud of their traditions, and those traditions deserved respect. On the last day of his community service, Jason stood in front of the palace again, just as he had done when he made his mistake. But this time, he felt no shame. Instead, he felt gratitude. He had worked hard to understand the value of respect and tradition, and he had done everything he could to make up for his earlier actions. He looked at the royal guards standing in their usual positions, their faces stoic and proud. He nodded at them silently, acknowledging the lesson he had learned. This time, his actions spoke louder than words. Jason left the country soon after, but the lessons he had learned stayed with him. He knew he would never make the same mistake again. Respect, he realized, was the key to truly understanding another culture, and he would carry that understanding with him for the rest of his life. A few weeks after returning home, Jason couldn't stop thinking about his trip. He had learned so much during those days spent in the foreign country. What had started as a silly mistake had turned into a life-changing experience. He had learned the true meaning of respect, not just for other people, but for their culture and traditions as well. Back in his own country, Jason found himself reflecting on his behavior. He had grown up with a sense of freedom, where everyone was encouraged to speak their mind and express themselves however they wished. But after everything he had gone through, Jason realized that respect for others went beyond just following rules. It was about understanding their values, their history, and the significance of the things they held dear. One evening, While talking to a friend about his travels, Jason found himself telling the entire story. The Royal Guard, the trash, the apology, and the community service. His friend listened attentively, nodding as Jason spoke. "You know," his friend said thoughtfully after Jason finished, "that could have been a disaster for you. But instead, it sounds like it taught you a lot about yourself and others." Jason smiled. "It really did. At first, I thought I was just being punished for a dumb joke. But now I see that it was about much more than that. I learned how important it is to show respect, especially when you're in someone else's country. What might seem small or funny to you can have a huge impact on someone else's culture. I won't ever forget that." Jason continued to think about how different his perspective had become. Every place he visited after that trip, he made sure to be mindful of the customs and traditions, even if they seemed strange to him at first. His experience had opened his eyes to the importance of learning about and appreciating other cultures before forming opinions or acting on impulses. Not long after returning home, Jason received an email from the embassy of the country he had visited. It was a simple message, just a reminder to continue respecting the values of others and to always approach new cultures with an open heart. Jason felt a warm sense of gratitude reading the email. It wasn't something he expected, but it was a reminder that his journey didn't just end with his apology. It had taught him something that would stay with him forever. One day, while volunteering at a local event, Jason met a group of international students from various countries. He found himself engaging in conversations with them about their traditions and cultures, listening intently as they shared their experiences. He realized that his time in the foreign country had made him more open and eager to learn about others, rather than make assumptions based on surface-level impressions. Jason's story became something he shared with others, both as a lesson in humility and as a reminder to never stop learning. Whenever he met someone from a different culture or country, he always took the time to ask questions and listen. And when he shared his story, he did so not with embarrassment, but with pride in how much he had grown. His mistake, once a source of shame, had become the turning point that had changed him for the better. He had learned that respect, humility, and understanding were the keys to truly connecting with others. And it was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. As time passed, Jason often found himself reflecting on the lessons he learned from his trip abroad. What had started as a careless mistake had transformed into a valuable experience that shaped his views on respect, tradition, and cultural understanding. It had been a tough journey, but one that had made him a better person in the end. One evening, Jason was sitting in his living room, scrolling through his social media. He saw a post from one of his friends who had just returned from a trip to the same country Jason had visited. The friend was posting pictures of the palace, the royal guards, and the local landmarks, sharing the memories of a great vacation. Jason smiled as he looked at the photos, remembering how excited he had been when he first arrived. But now, everything felt different. He no longer viewed the palace or the royal guards with the same lighthearted amusement he had once had. He had learned that some traditions, some roles, were far more important than just a tourist attraction. It wasn't just about posing for photos or making jokes. It was about appreciating the deeper meaning behind those things. Jason decided to send a message to his friend, sharing the story of his experience. He wrote, "Hey, I saw your photos from the palace. It brought back memories of my trip there, but I wanted to share something with you. I learned a big lesson when I was there. I made a huge mistake by disrespecting the royal guard. It was meant to be a joke, but I quickly learned that the guards weren't just statues or props for tourists. They represent the history, pride, and respect of the country. I had to apologize, and I ended up doing community service to make things right. It was a humbling experience, but one that taught me a lot about the importance of respect for other cultures." Jason paused for a moment before hitting send. He knew his friend would be surprised by his message, but he felt it was important to share the lesson he had learned. When he saw the reply come through a few minutes later, his friend's response was supportive and understanding. "Wow, I had no idea that happened. I'm glad you learned something important from it, though. It's easy to forget that the things we find funny or interesting can mean so much more to others. Thanks for sharing, and I'll definitely keep that in mind when I travel. Jason felt a sense of satisfaction as he read the message. It wasn't about him being right or wrong. It was about spreading the message that respect mattered. He had taken responsibility for his actions, learned from them, and now he was helping others understand the importance of cultural respect as well. The next time Jason traveled, he was more mindful of the cultures he visited. He took the time to learn about local customs and traditions before arriving, making sure he didn't make the same mistake again. And when he spoke to others about his travels, he did so with a new perspective. He didn't just share the fun and exciting moments. He shared the lessons he had learned along the way, encouraging others to be respectful and open-minded, just as he had learned to be. Jason knew that respect for others was something that didn't just stop when you left another country. It was something you carried with you everywhere. It was a value that stayed with you for a lifetime, and one he would never forget. He had learned the hard way, but it was a lesson that would stay with him forever.